open to there. There's a lot to uncover this morning. Have a lot to talk about. And you guys feel free to bring in your comments and questions. Want to get as much engagement out of this as we can. I don't have all the answers, and I'm certain you guys have some things to add to this discussion as well. So 18 and 19 are going to be very tied in. So Josh asked me to teach 19 as well, which is going to be on Wednesday. And the more I've been studying, the more I see these chapters go right hand in hand. So that was a great move on Josh's part. So it's going to be good. You know, we're going to tie those discussions in, hopefully put a nice bow on it on Wednesday. And I hope you guys will agree with that. Just the discussions are very, very hand in hand there. So let's get right into the text here. Verses 1 through 5. And the Lord appeared to him, that's Abraham, by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth, and said, O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree, while I bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant. So they said, do as you have said. Okay? So, interesting introduction to this chapter. Abraham is sitting in the heat of the day under some trees, and the Lord comes to visit him, right? The Lord and 2 angels. We're forced to assume. It's not told directly right in that instance, but we find later that they are angels. In this moment, I'm not inclined to believe that Abraham understands that this is God. He doesn't know that God is visiting him right in this moment. I think we see that later he comes to understand that it is. And even if he did, he very well could have. I could be totally speculating there, but commentary I read and the studies that I've done on this chapter so far, I don't think in this instance God or Abraham is treating these visitors with more respect because he thinks that they are God and some angels. They appear to him as men. If you notice in verse 2, it just says he sees 3 men, right? So these would have just been 3 travelers, sojourners of some kind. And if he knew that it was God, that's great. Maybe he did. But again, just throwing that out there that he doesn't necessarily know that this is God right here in this instance, okay? And then I see some significance in the fact that the Lord is appearing directly to Abraham as a man, right? Not in his glory, not in his normal, God, divine presence, because no one can see God and live, as we learn in Exodus chapter 33, verse 20, where God says, you cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live, okay? So it is interesting that the Lord brings himself to Abraham in the form of a man. And it is fascinating to think about what it would have looked like to see God face to face, even if this wasn't God's true, form. But just interesting to think about what this would have looked like as a bystander, or to be in Abraham's perspective here. But one thing I do want you to take away from this class, I'll just say this from the beginning so this is in the back of your mind. God is coming to visit Abraham for a purpose. He's going to talk to him about several different things. But as we learn later, Abraham is the friend of God. Okay? So God is coming to visit his friend. He's got some things he needs to say, and he also has some things he wants to bounce off of Abraham. So we'll get into that later, into the very end of the chapter. But just an interesting setting here where God is coming to visit Abraham in the flesh, and Abraham gets to have a conversation with God. Pretty cool story that we're about to study through here. So here's the setting for this. I know that may be a little hard to read. It's hard to see that. Probably easier to see this. So the Oaks of Mamre. Mamre was right outside of the town that the Israelites would have known as Hebron. Hebron, there's some other tie-ins later on in the Old Testament that we see several different instances. A little Bible trivia time. Anybody think of any specific Bible instances or stories that we know about that happened in the city of Hebron? There's a couple that I found. Anybody know any?
13, Abraham builds an altar to God at that place.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. Yep. Anything else?
David is anointed king of Judah.
He is. Yep. And not only that, he reigns there for 7 years and 6 months, right? So David reigns, if you didn't hear Josh, David is anointed king over Judah in Hebron, and he reigned there for 7 years and 6 months. So this is before he could officially reign, when Saul was still running the country and trying to kill him. But that's in 2 Samuel chapter 2. Gary mentioned the Genesis chapter 13, the altar. Anybody else? I've got 2 more. They're pretty obscure, so wouldn't have expected any. I had to look them up. So Hebron was a city of refuge. So during the time of the judges, it was a place to go for safety if you accidentally killed someone or committed some crime you needed to be safe from. So I thought that was interesting. And then Hebron was Absalom's, David's son's, headquarters while he and his followers plotted to overthrow David. So a little like father, like son moment. Hebron was a town that David thought was good enough. So did his son as he was trying to overthrow his father. So found that interesting. But as far as I could see, Hebron is not mentioned at all in the New Testament. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, or come talk to me after if you saw something. But I couldn't find any instances of it being mentioned, so I just thought that was interesting. But Hebron has some significance in the Old Testament later on after this story. But in this particular story, we see where Hebron is, right? And this is the area where Abraham lives, okay? This is where he's sojourning, living in tents, okay? And then you see Sodom and Gomorrah on the other side of the Dead Sea, okay? That's where Lot, his nephew, lives. And that's where the story is going to start transitioning over to at the end of this chapter and into chapter 19 as we get into that. So not super close here. This is a long distance away, but across the Dead Sea from where Abraham would have lived. Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
I probably should have noted this in the material. That, of course, that route is speculation of how they would have traveled. So there's a lot of thinking that the southern portion of the Dead Sea was not there before Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. So
Interesting.
it may have been a much more direct route than that map would have.
Yeah, if you didn't hear Josh, he made this map, so it's his fault if it's wrong. Oh, you didn't make the map. Okay. He sent me the map, so it's a good map. I like it. But yeah, if you didn't hear Josh, he just said they very well could have, where that last little jut down and then come back up north near Zoar, the Dead Sea might not have been that far down back in Abraham's time. So they very well could have crossed over dry land right there. So interesting. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Okay. So again, this is right outside the city of Hebron. And verse 2, Abraham notices he has some visitors, immediately gets up, runs to greet them, shows immediate action there, makes them feel welcome. Like I said, most commentators assert Abraham did not know that these visitors were divine. Okay, so found that interesting. I personally, when I was reading it, I thought, Abraham knew this was God. But then I started to read, and then verse 2 says 3 men were standing in front of him. So I think we are being forced to assume that he does not know that this is God, okay? But he will come to find that out very quickly here, as you'll see. Verses 3 through 5, Abraham Abraham tells his visitors he wants to serve them, make them feel welcome, host them, get to know them probably. The usage of "O Lord" here, you may say, oh, he says "O Lord," that's Jehovah. Well, it's not. This is not the same translation that we're familiar with of any usage, portraying God, okay? So this is just a respectful usage of "O Lord," okay? So found that interesting. He's just giving these men respect that they're visitors and he wants to serve them. So he's showing hospitality to these men. Do not pass by. Stay, basically in his vernacular, stay a while. I'd love to have you, love to get to know you. You'd be my honored guest if you would have some food with me for a little bit, okay? So let's get into verse 6 through 8, okay? Yeah, go ahead, Gary.
You make a good point about he didn't know who they were, and the New Testament bears that out as well in Hebrews chapter 13, verses 1 and 2. And it also, Hebrews 13 talks about the importance of hospitality and how significant it is, especially his specific hospitality at this point. And I'll just read Hebrews 13, verses 1 and 2. Keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it.
Yeah.
A direct reference to what we're talking about here.
Absolutely. You read my slides, didn't you? I did. No. Yes, that's exactly a tie-in to this story. The Hebrew writer pulls that reference in, so very interesting. But you're completely right on there. So let's get into verse 6 through 8 here. And Abraham went quickly into the tent to Sarah. This is after the angels and God are here, and he wants to serve them, right? Immediately takes action. Abraham went quickly into the tent to Sarah and said, "Quick, 3 seahs of fine flour, knead it, make cakes." And Abraham ran to the herd, took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to a young man who prepared it quickly. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree while they ate. Okay? So a lot to unpack here just about Abraham's character. So focus in on Abraham, the man, for a moment with me. I want to take away a couple things I think we can even apply to ourselves, right? Attributes of Abraham that I think God ultimately found desirable in Abraham and why he was originally chosen in the first place, but just, a testament to his character as a man. Notice his immediate action in verse 6 and his hospitality, willingness to show hospitality to strangers, okay? I think in our culture today that's pretty far gone in some respects. It's hard to trust strangers from time to time, so that's probably the last thing on our mind is to have people over, give them food, serve them, wash their feet, right? But it's a principle I think we should maybe look into a little bit more. I'm speaking to myself there as well. Verse 7, he runs out to the field, grabs a calf, gives it to a servant. The calf, they prepare the calf, kill it, prepare to serve it. And his servants, think about his servants. They would have been serving Abraham, right? So seeing their master run around scrambling to prepare this meal for his visitors would have shown them, we're not just serving this man. This man is a servant himself. I thought that was interesting, right? He is a servant, even though he has servants. So this would have been a testament to Abraham's leadership and that he had his house in order. Notice Abraham originally said he'd make them a morsel of bread, but what does it say that he goes on to do? Curds, milk, the calf, right? He's going above and beyond here. It's not a morsel of bread. So this is quite the self-deprecating remark that Abraham says about himself. I think this shows his humility, right? So he goes above and beyond to serve these men. Then verse 8, Abraham stood by while his guests enjoyed a meal. This would have been right in line with Bedouin hospitality at the time of Abraham. The people of Abraham's area, the Arabians, the Syrians, the people of that time, they would have sat around and waited while their guests finished eating. They would not have eaten with them. So found that interesting. Gary looked at my slides, so he already knew what I put up here. But it is a very interesting passage that the Hebrew writer puts in. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. We know about this story. We know about Abraham doing it. I'm not going to get into speculation. I texted Josh about this passage, and of course he left me hanging. He didn't give me any obscure beliefs or anything about this, so I was kind of sad about that. But I don't have any views on this. I just think it's a very interesting passage to think about. Are angels still around today? I don't have any views on that. But if they are, we better be ready to show them hospitality, right? Abraham was. So be like Abraham in that way. But it is fascinating to think about God and angels coming to visit Abraham. I just think this is such a cool introduction to this story that maybe we sometimes overlook. I know I have. Any comments or questions before we move into the next section? Yeah, go ahead, JD.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the narrative doesn't say Abraham saw these people coming from afar, and they slowly got closer to him, and he had time to process what to do. And he looked up and it was action right away. So this was something that was part of his character.
Yeah.
And the running and the quickly, that's who he was. That he was ready to do that, to
I agree. If you didn't hear what JD said, he was willing to show hospitality and jumped up immediately, took action. So just a testament to his character. Any other thoughts? Yeah, go ahead.
It also is a testament to, he sacrificed quite a bit of time, because when we read it, it says, God ran quickly. But like, this isn't a quick process to prepare a calf and to make cakes of flour and stuff. It's not like super quick, so it's convicting to us now, time is so precious,
Yeah.
that it's like, well, I don't really have the time, but you can make the time.
Yeah.
Because he did.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's an old man. Imagine a 100-year-old man running around in the field going to pick up a calf and carry it in. He must have been a pretty strong guy, right? Or he led it, who knows. But yeah, go ahead, sir.
I'll say nothing is more welcoming to a household when you walk in than the aroma of fresh bread being baked.
Amen.
It's the greatest hospitality symbol.
Yeah, I agree. I love bread a little too much, so I agree with that. Yeah. So definitely a lot to be said, and I think that's just a principle that has stood the test of time, right? Hospitality is never going to go out of style. It hasn't ever been out of style. So Abraham goes the extra mile to make these visitors feel very welcome. Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
It kind of goes along with Matthew 25, where people would have done things for the Lord if they had known who he was, because they said, when did we not give you to drink? When we did not feed you? He said, do it to the least of these. So when it talks about angels unaware, we have opportunity, and sometimes we sort which opportunities that we want to minister to based on who's asking.
Yeah, I agree. We should show no partiality in that regard. That's a good point. Okay, good comments. Thank you. Let's move on to the next section here. So, verse 9 through 15, we'll read that very quickly. They said to him, after all the service has happened, "Where is Sarah your wife?" And he said, "She is in the tent." The Lord said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife shall have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I'm worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son." But Sarah denied it, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. He said, "No, but you did laugh." Okay? So we get down to business here, right? After the visitors are fed, Abraham's taking care of them, Lord jumps right into business. I think this is where we start to see that Abraham knows these are not normal people. I don't have verse 9 up there, but in verse 9, if you see, they said to him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" When did Sarah turn into Sarah? Her name was Sarai previously. What chapter did she turn into Sarah? 17. We just covered that, right? So she's just changed her name. We don't know how long it's been exactly since the last chapter. Could have been a year, could have been not much time between 17 and 18. Do we know?
They're 99 both chapters.
Okay, so same age, literally same age. So this is a short time after she's introduced as Sarah. Her name is changed, okay? So we don't know how many people would have known her from age 90 to her birth, right? That's a long time. People would have known her as Sarai, right? Now her name is Sarah in God's eyes. So not going to speculate, but I think this is the Lord giving Abraham a hint that, all right, let's talk, right? We're not talking about bread anymore or calves. We're here to talk your future and my plan for you. Okay, so now Abraham, I would like to think, is pretty certain that he's talking to God. I already covered that Sarah's name changed. So two things interesting about verses 12 through 15 or so. Sarah laughs just like her husband Abraham laughed, right? Abraham laughed in chapter 17 whenever God tells him that he's going to have a child in his old age. But we talked about this a little bit on Wednesday. What was Abraham's spirit when he was laughing? Funny, right? A little deeper maybe. Think his joy. Yep, joy. Shock, right? It wasn't disbelief. It wasn't lack of faith, right? We see here, at least I see here, this is lack of faith. This is disbelief. This isn't shock. This isn't joy. This isn't, misunderstanding. This is, no, I don't believe that's going to happen, right? So, totally different spirits of the laughter. They both laughed, but Abraham's was out of joy and shock, and Sarah's was out of disbelief and lack of faith. Okay, so we're going to come back to that here in a little bit. But either way, Sarah's reaction was totally different than Abraham's. So, two possibilities here. Sarah's reaction suggests one of two things. Either Abraham did not tell Sarah that this was going to happen. I don't think that's the case. I think Abraham would have probably told Sarah and been extremely happy that this is going to happen. So either he did not tell Sarah, unlikely in my opinion, or he did and she wasn't convinced. So this is why God comes to tell her again. But again, it's Sarah's attitude that I want to take away from this section, that she had a disbelieving attitude about this promise of God. She even makes a sensual remark. Shall I have pleasure, right? Like, we're too old for all that, right? God, we don't do that anymore. How am I going to have a child? But she doesn't understand. She's dealing with the Creator. God can make anything happen. Is anything too hard for the Lord? Verse 14. Is anything too hard for the Lord? No. So again, Sarah's disbelief does give us a very powerful saying in Scripture. Is anything too hard for the Lord? God's reprimand of Sarah does further prove, in my mind, that her laughter was in a completely different spirit than Abraham's was in the previous chapter, just based on the reading there. But she was laughing out of doubt and faithlessness, not out of astonishment. Then look at verse 15, where she denies her laughter. I find this very interesting too. She denies her laughter, and God says, no, but you did laugh. So I wonder if in this very moment, is Sarah starting to become intrigued by this possibility at the age of 90 or 89 or however old she is, that she would have a child, and this would have been totally out of the norm. This wouldn't have been a standard thing. Even though they lived longer back then, having a child at that old age would not have been possible. So this would have only been by an act of God. So I just think maybe her saying, no, I didn't deny it, like maybe she's kind of intrigued at this possibility. Just interesting to think about. Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's because she laughed to herself.
Yeah.
Nobody heard it, and yet the Lord is saying, laugh. So, and you said
Yeah.
she was afraid.
Yeah.
She knew,
Someone's listening.
something happened.
Yeah. I thought about that too, and it says she laughed and then said to herself, right? So she laughed to herself, right, after I'm worn out. So it's like, did she say this in her mind? Did she say this audibly out loud? Either way, I don't think she wanted anyone to hear what she was saying, right? Just trying to keep it to herself. So, good point. God is, clearly he can hear our thoughts or our whispers, whatever those are, right? Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Well, and the Hebrew writer paints a different picture when he says that she counted the Lord faithful in his promises.
Okay.
So at some point, we get a different picture of Lot in 2 Peter 2
Yeah.
than we do in the next few chapters. So in retrospect, she was a woman of faith.
Yeah. We're going to get to that. Don't steal my. Yeah, go ahead, Murray.
To follow up on your good point, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was Maria first, and then I'll come to you, Gary. You're good, man. I'll come back to you. Go ahead.
I don't know how this plays into it, but in chapter 21, verse 1, and I'm talking about like logistically, but it says the Lord visited Sarah as he said, and this is the birth of Isaac, but the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he promised, and Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age. Which I always find interesting that it doesn't talk about Abraham and Sarah conceiving, it talks about the Lord visiting Sarah.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if that plays a part into this to say
Yeah.
That the Lord provided that child.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, maybe we're a little too hard on Sarah in the fact that she laughed, right? That, yeah, this would have been totally unbelievable and only an act of God. Yeah, go ahead, Gary.
Sorry, Maria.
No, you're
To follow up on your good point about maybe Abraham he failed to convince Sarah about this promise. Do we find it interesting there in verse 13 that the Lord asked Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? As opposed to just going, the simpler thing may have been, go straight to Sarah. Why did you laugh?
Yeah.
He asked Abraham, why did your wife lie? Why did Sarah lie? So I just find that very, very interesting.
It's very interesting. Like, maybe it begs the question. We don't know, totally speculating, but maybe he didn't say anything. But I find that hard to believe. I think that he would have told her, and she would have not believed it. But yeah, it's very interesting. It could go either way. Did he tell her? Did he not? It doesn't really matter. She's in disbelief, but she comes around later as we come to find out. Steve mentioned the Hebrews chapter 11 passage. She's mentioned in the Hall of Faith, Heroes of Faith passage. So she eventually comes around and understands this is going to happen and has faith. And we're going to talk more about that here in a moment. But very good points. Very good points. Thank you. So let's move to the next slide here. So this is the passage that Steve mentioned. By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Okay? And I bolded the last part there, since she considered him faithful who had promised, right? And then notice the first phrase, by faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive. Okay? So again, this isn't Abraham. This is God giving her the ability to become pregnant based on faith. Okay? Would have been totally out of the norm. But by her faith, she does come around. In this moment in the story, she doesn't have faith. But I think she comes to have faith, and it would have happened in the next year or so. Yeah, Josh, go ahead.
So two things.
Yep.
One, I think all these stories and the commentary of the Hebrew writer are just emphasizing to us that we are people of faith. That does not mean there are not moments of weakness and doubt. You can have those moments and yet still be considered a person of faith, which is exactly what you find with Abraham and Sarah. And then to the other point you were making, Romans 4 speaks of Abraham's faith in the sense of he did not consider his own body, which was now beyond dead, if you will, and Sarah's womb. And so it is for both of them. They're going to have to put trust in God that yes, the bodies they have right now unable, but yet God is going to make it possible.
Yeah, agreed. Well said. Any other thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
Am I understanding that from that verse that was read in chapter 21 that God came to Sarah like he'd been married and conceived the cause of conception versus Abraham?
I don't have any thoughts on that.
No, it wouldn't be, because God had promised earlier, you will bear a son from your own loins to Abraham.
Okay. So,
So it's going to be Abraham.
Doing
I think
it,
Maria's
yeah.
point is, God visiting is making it, like you just said, it is making it possible for Abraham and Sarah, who are well beyond this time. Yes, this is now possible.
yeah. Good question. Good question. Right. So there's some divine intervention here, but it's not a miraculous, conception. Right. Go ahead.
Well, it is miraculous.
It's yes. So it's not like Christ, right? It's not like Christ. Go ahead.
Abraham was able to conceive with Hagar and also Keturah when he was
Yeah.
it didn't seem as novel.
Sarah was barren. Sarah was barren. Right. Yep. And that's what makes this story so fascinating, is the fact that she is barren. God obviously can still overcome that and make his plan come to fruition, right? I can't help but think about Abraham and Sarah as they're hearing these promises. We're going to make a great nation out of you. And they're like, we're 100 years old and we don't have any kids. Why do you keep telling us that? Right? It would have been totally unbelievable. But in this moment, I think this is where it all starts to click with Sarah. Abraham's already believing. But Sarah's starting to come to knowledge of the faith that she's going to become a mother of her own child. Yeah. I'm sorry if I'm missing something. Yeah, go ahead, ma'am.
What I find fascinating is that when Sarah was younger, she could have 4 children. But God chose
Yeah. He's in an effort to show his power, right? That God can overcome mankind's limitations, right? It doesn't matter if you're young or old, God can make happen what he needs to make happen for his plan. Good comments. I do need to move on, but appreciate everyone's comments there. But again, I wanted to throw this out there. I think we may be a bit too hard on Sarah. Josh made this point. I think Maria made this point as well. Sarah, we maybe are a little too unfair to her. She laughed and she had a horrible, spirit of disbelief. But as I studied this, I started to have some grace for Sarah, and I think we should, because this would have been totally unbelievable, as we've already said so many times. So give Sarah some grace. Put yourself in her situation, right? It's easy for us to be like, Sarah, right? We see the story. We know how it unfolds. She doesn't know. So I just find that interesting that, we're a little too hard on her, but not discrediting the fact that she did disbelieve. She should have believed in God in the very moment, the laughing and all that, but it was just a moment of weakness, right? But she overcomes that and comes to believe, as the Hebrews 11 passage beautifully states. So I found Sarah to be a very relatable Bible character. I don't know if anyone else does, but we do have to move on. So verse 17 through 19, we'll read, pick up in verse 16. Then the men set out from there, and they looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham went away with them to set them on their way. The Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do, seeing that Abraham shall become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him? For I have chosen him that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him." Okay? So God initiates this dialogue with Abraham. Okay? He's going to share his plans. He's debating whether he should share his plans with Abraham about what he's going to do to Sodom and Gomorrah. In Isaiah 41, verse 8, this kind of goes back to what I said earlier. God refers to Abraham as his friend. He's a trusted friend. So it's almost as if he's wanting to share his plans with Abraham. I don't know, is he wanting Abraham to talk him out of this? He seems willing to be talked out of it later on, as we see at the end of the chapter, but he's still ultimately going to show his judgment, whether there's 10 righteous or whether there's 50 righteous, right? So Abraham tries to intercede on behalf of Sodom, but God is still going to have his righteous judgment on this evil place, okay? So I found it interesting that God wants to share his plan with Abraham, shows the trust level that God would have had for him. And then notice a few things that it says about Abraham. That he may command his children and household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice. Doing righteousness and justice. Okay? So God expected Abraham to pass those principles down to his children, right? Not just be the father of a great nation, but to actually pass those principles down to his children. Okay? So God is trying to show Abraham that even though judgment is coming to this evil place, it's still a righteous and just judgment. Okay? This isn't a willy-nilly decision that God is making. Clearly, as we see in verse 20, we'll read 20 through 21. Then the Lord said, "Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me, and if not, I will know." So, slides up there if you need to read that. So he lists out the reasons why he wants to share this plan with Abraham, okay? God wants Abraham to know why this is happening. So I found that fascinating. Verse 20, clearly Sodom and Gomorrah's reputation precedes them, okay? I've heard it called that they were the Las Vegas of their time. Well, Las Vegas isn't as crazy as, they used to be compared to the rest of our society, as sad as that is. So, that may not be a fair comparison anymore, but they're known for their wickedness and their sin. The outcries have come to God about this evil place and their influences that they're having. So people are praying. Just imagine what their prayers would have been to God. Please let their bad influences end. It's causing evil influences to, intrude into our lives, God, right? So verse 21, God says, "I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that's come to me." Okay? So God didn't need to go down. He's all-knowing, all-present, right? He knows what's happening in Sodom and Gomorrah. He doesn't need to go there. But this is just his way of saying, in a human fashion, I'm going to go see this for myself and prove that what I know is already happening is happening. Okay? But it goes to show that God does hear the outcries. He hears the prayers against these places, and he's going to act on it, right? But he does want to get Abraham's thoughts on it first. Any other thoughts before I move into the final section here? Comments, questions? Okay. All right, so we are running out of time. I do need to move fairly quickly through this last section, but verses 23 through 25, I do want to read that specifically. So the angels leave, right? They're going down to Sodom and Gomorrah, as we find in 19. We'll pick up in their story later. Then Abraham drew near and said, "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just?" Okay, and then God, of course, says, if I find 50 righteous, I'll spare the city, right? So he's agreeable. He's willing to negotiate on their behalf if needed. He doesn't want Sodom and Gomorrah to be destroyed, but he has to do it because the outcries against them have become so evil, and it's causing negative impacts on other people, right? So God has to enact his justice on them. But I do find it interesting that Abraham begins to plead on behalf of Sodom. Yes, he does have some family that lives there. He's got Lot and his family, so he has some kinsmen. There's some skin in the game for Abraham that he would have cared for. But notice as we go down, right? I'm not going to read the whole section. Read it on your own time as you have time. But down through verse 27 all the way down to the end of the chapter, Abraham is able to haggle God down. Haggle may be the wrong word. I think the commentary that we were using for this class called it more exploration. I thought that was a fair word. God is exploring how far can I get God down to the table, negotiating the number down, right? So 45, 40, 30, 20, he gets down to 10, and then God is done negotiating at that point. No, if it's less than 10, sorry, that's sad, right? There's got to be at least 10 righteous people in this place for me to spare it, okay? Now notice what Abraham says, right? Far be it from you to do such a thing, that the righteous fare as the wicked. Well, little does Abraham know, as we're going to cover in the next chapter, there aren't any righteous people, right? Besides his own family. Maybe there were others, at least we don't know. We couldn't find any others, so what he says is the ultimate irony. God's judgment is just and righteous. So, found that interesting. But to Abraham's credit, he does approach God in a spirit of humility. In verse 27, he does say that he's dust and ashes, right? So he's not coming like, oh God, how dare you do this, right? He's still in his same spirit of humility, approaching God, trying to intercede and intervene on their behalf. He doesn't want this place to suffer destruction. So we talked about how he got him down to 10. Notice when Abraham gets down to 30 and 10, he says, God, please don't be angry. I'm sorry, I'm asking again. Are you willing to do 30, right? So it's almost like, is he pushing his luck, right? But God listens every time, okay? And then when he gets down to 10, God leaves. That's the end of it, right? So notice that. That's very important. He leaves. God's done. No, if there's not more than 10, sorry, that's too bad. So Abraham stopping at 10 to me shows, okay, he knows he's got at least 4 family members there that we have recorded, so he cares about people. There's a genuine care for others. He may have known some people there. He's had some run-ins with Sodom in the past, as we've studied already, but it seems to be a genuine care for the people of Sodom here in my mind. He wants to save this place from destruction if he can do anything about it. So the Lord went on his way. So again, God is merciful, but his mercy has limitations, right? Sin is sin, and God isn't willing to look away from sin, but for his friend Abraham, he was willing to negotiate this down as far as he could in his mind. So again, the city still had to do their part, right? Even though Abraham is interceding on their behalf, if there's not enough righteous people, too bad. All that intercession is going to be wasted by Abraham. So again, Abraham cared for people, and he did not want this to happen. So just a few applications from this story. I know that may be hard to read, but just a few things that I took away. God cares for his friends. Abraham was his friend. We are his friends if we live by his principles. Nothing is too hard for God. Verse 14. God hears the outcries against sin and evil. Verse 20. God's judgment is just. God is approachable, right? He stands around and waits for Abraham to approach him, has a conversation with him. And we should care for strangers just like Abraham did. God is merciful, but his mercy can reach limitations. Anybody else have any others? Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Well, that fits in with that, but God is not only merciful, but he's patient.
Patient.
I mean, it's hard to even imagine going and negotiating with God like this. But God puts up with it.
He does. He does. He's patient. How's patient? Yeah, Gary.
So super quick. I love the word you use, negotiation, and it's a really, really interesting conversation between Abraham and God here, right? It's a negotiation, and I'm going to throw out JD. I'm going to throw JD under the bus here, but JD is a super, super good negotiator. He really, really is. And JD will be the first to tell you never throw out the first figure. And this is almost, it's not comical, but it is almost comical, this conversation, because it's almost like Abraham thinks, okay, I could have gone lower. Like he says 50, but then he says 45. I could have gone lower and I could have gone lower, because there's no resolution to what this conversation is as you go through it.
Yeah.
God says, I will spare it, but that's all the conversation is.
Yeah.
So it's almost like Abraham is saying, wow, I could have gone lower. I could have started lower. And Abraham, like the saying JD, would be the first to tell you, don't throw out that first figure.
Yeah.
And Abraham did.
Yeah, maybe he should have started at 10.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he could have got him down to 4, maybe. No. Yeah, go ahead, Zach.
Just real quick.
Yeah.
I find this really interesting in conjunction with Noah. I mean, if you look, think of how bad the world was during Noah's time. They couldn't even find 10 righteous in the whole world. Only 8 were saved. What if there were 10 in the whole world who been saved? I think this passage always goes to show just how bad the state of the world was in.
Yeah, yeah. It's a good point. Very good point. In the time of Noah, they couldn't find 10 righteous, so what's to say they could find 10 righteous in a small town like this? We are out of time. We're going to cover chapter 19 on Wednesday, so go ahead and read that for Wednesday. Thank you for your attention.